defining parameter of modernism. Because modern, and we all young people, बच्चे, मेरे ख्याल में दिन में 50 बार modern शब्द का यूज़ करते हैं. I don't think many of us reflect on what actually is modern in the Western history of ideas. They shift, ontological shift from God to man, and epistemological shift from book to reason. That is modernity. And the Enlightenment project, great faith in reason. If you give up your blind faith in religion and use only reason, the millennia, the second coming, the happy mankind. But it didn't happen. It ended in a Armageddon, the world wars. Now in the Indian mind, if reason, तर्क, हमारे यहाँ तर्क का प्रयोग है और ये ज़्यादा अच्छा शब्द नहीं माना जाता. ए मैन हू रीजन्स टू मच कहते हैं बड़ा तार्किक है ये, और मेरी भाषा में कहते हैं बड़ा बहसी है, बहस करता है. और तार्किक बुद्धि is not considered the best kind of intellect. But then India switched from, Indian mind switched from ritual to reason with Mahatma Buddha. Buddha's great contribution that he shifted the Indian mind from ritual, faith, to reason. So India has been perpetually traditional, perpetually modern. Now reasoning, we accept reason as a very important epistemology, anumana, prataksha then anumana. But then we don't make it superordinate. My friend Bhartrihari, you know why I call him my friend? Because he comes in handy very often. He has a tremendous book, Vakyapadya. And if my young friends, I don't worry too much of people of my age. हम लोग पके हुए फल हैं, हम तो गिरेंगे. But the young minds I think can. Vakyapadya, a tremendous book about philosophy of language, which means philosophy of meaning, which means how you construct this world in your mind. So Bhartrihari says that Tarka, you see, will not tell you. You take a, Doshiji said, you throw a number of seeds on the ground. The rains come, a small percentage will grow, not the others. Which ones? Can Tarka show that? Right now, not. Maybe sometime we will make such a tremendous sophisticated analysis of reasoning abilities and data inputs that when we look at the seed, we will say, this will grow there, this will not grow there. Huh? So, or the person who judges the diamond by looking at it, reason cannot tell you which diamond is more expensive or pure, or the wine taster, or the tea taster. So reason has its limits. And that's why Tark is, this is the problem. So how do you know valid, how do you get valid knowledge? Language? Now remember that in our tradition of thought, language is central. Just as geometry was central to the Greeks, language is central to Indian thought. And in language also, I just showed you Buddhist problem that language cannot reach you, therefore you have to transcend language. Therefore, with the yoga philosophy, you have to go into samadhi, meditation, nirvikalpa, where the word does not exist, so that the subject and the object collapse, and even the awareness of instrument is lost. then you get direct apperception, extraordinary perception, alaukik pratyaksha, and then you get knowledge. Now that is one possibility. It involves a whole process of meditation, reflection, self-reflection. The Abrahamic and the Vedic, they are different, because one is monistic and monotheistic, the other is pluralistic and pluritheistic. Now when the mind, and we people in India through our education are being taught monism, monotheism, we are taught of the importance of finding one, of having one God or one thing, and dismissing variety, although we uphold it as unity in diversity and all that. But look at your old education, it teaches you to find one, the superordinate one. But then monism creates a kind of a mindset where it's a straitjacket and you have to break through it. And how do you break through it? Plato posited, and Plato was cheek and jowl with the Hebrews, very close, and he was arguing with them. Some of us who are familiar with his ontology, the four levels of reality, you see, with the Hebraic mind saying, make no images. Images are a corruption of the mind. And Plato saying, why are you cribbing? Even what you call real is an image. That level of form and idea. So he says difference. He posits the category of difference. So Mr. Derrida is not the one who pioneers the category. The difference or bheda. Now that is the idea. Since there is a bheda, you have to handle it. You have to negotiate with it. Again, in our habits of mind, bhed buddhi is considered a lower kind of buddhi. Only at one level you see the difference. And when you go higher in the hierarchy, you have to search for oneness. Ekatva buddhi sarvavad avirodhini. The unifying intellect is not opposed to any single school of thought. This is again Bhartrihari. Akatva buddhi sarvavad avirodhini. Okay then hence the dialogue mode. I think it's clear why. If there is the solipsism about knowing, if there is uncertainty, if language is not enough medium, if senses are not enough, in fact there is no one reality about which you can predicate, then you have to talk to people. You have to talk to people, particularly those who think differently from you. So dialogue, and there are two meanings of this, two kinds of dialogue. I think dialogue is not just say we read Plato's dialogues. We read Draupadi Yudhishthira dialogue in Mahabharata. We read Vishwamitra Nadi, Vishwamitra talking to the river Satluj in Rig Veda. And we read the Yami dialogue in the Brahmanas, and any number of dialogues in Indian textual traditions. That's one, Plato's dialogues and others. The other meaning of dialogue is the self interacting, the consciousness of one's self interacting with inputs, sensory and other. Because when we say I am thinking, what we are doing is our schema in the self is negotiating with the schema which is being input into your cognition, into your cognitive processes. So this is the intrinsic dialogue. A word, for example, communion. When we say I am in communion with myself. So in all creative act, in all creation, whether by a poet or a painter or an architect, this intrinsic dialogue is there. And this dialogue will be with several things. One will be interior dialogue, with what he already knows, what he already thinks. And sometimes, you see, he is pulled out of it by the inputs coming in. He will also be in dialogue with the external things, the environment, the society, the worldview, the materials. Because the artist, in fact, when he sets out to either make a chair, because I'm going to come to that, Plato's paradigm artist is a carpenter, or when he looks at the clay, our potter, the kumbhakara, then, he is negotiating with that material. He is negotiating with the material. So this is the intrinsic dialogue. And that is the one which is involved in creativity. The word dialogue that we use generally is for the statement or expression of these processes of knowledge constitution. So one is that intrinsic consciousness interacting, and the other is when we externalize it, we write it down and we sort of make visible the process which is involved in this cogitation that one is dealing with. So forgetting for the moment the first one that is only creativity, we'll come to the familiar notion of dialogue. Why did Plato, for example, or Vedavyasa cast his statement in the form of a dialogue? Why not a reasoned treatise? Because the opposite of dialogue is a reasoned treatise. So you can have a series of Mahavakyas, series of declarative sentences. Why not that? Because, why cast it in the form of a dialogue? Because one answer we have already had. Because it is one man's statement, a declarative statement, is open to questioning. From a statement like this is tasty to God exists. So there is no certainty. There is no validity. You have to validate it. A scientist validates his hypothesis with an experimental method. But how does a philosopher validate? A philosopher validates his claim by bringing in several voices. So it's not just the voice of God, but voices of gods. So many gods. So that is how it gets validated. Questioning and answering, raising doubts and resolving them, anticipating. In fact, the composer is creating the characters. He is creating the characters. That way it's a form of drama. He creates the characters. But he anticipates and he expresses what he has come across or is likely to come across as reasoned objections to his position. So he puts them there. So the question and answer takes place in your presence, in my presence. I am there. I am a participant. I am like the spectator in a play. And not only that, I am in Indian text, I am a participant in the play. Because what the composer is doing is to lead me. Doshiji used that word of a gardener or a somebody, the plants. So he leads me to the plant, to the idea. But then the plant must grow on its own. In the same way, I, as a participant, as a reader, must also reach my own conclusions. The dialogue composer does not foreclose my options. The example is from Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is a celebrated dialogue. If you want to look at a dialogue, look at Bhagavad Gita. It's a dialogue. It's a dialogue embedded in mass media, epic. The epic is the mass media. And Ved Vyasa is all Ved Vyasa. But he puts all the ideas in the mouth of Lord Krishna so that there is authenticity. For authenticity. But I am sure Lord Krishna, being the chariot driver, would not have spent so much time, in 700 shlokas when the armies were poised to fight. So it's embedded there. The dialogue is embedded there. And it is embedded so that it gets currency. And secondly, the voice of Krishna authenticates. Just as Plato in his dialogues, ultimately it is the voice of Socrates. The conclusions are those of Socrates. There are a number of people in dialogues ranging from 2 to 7, sometimes even more. But then Socrates is always there. And then Socrates, he is the one generally who leads, who raises questions, who asks, invites, and then, makes statements which you are supposed, but then you are led there. Then in Bhagavad Gita, after Arjuna has asked 17 questions, and they've been answered, there has been a debate. At the end of it, in chapter 18, verse 63, what does Lord Krishna say? Arjun, I have told you everything. Now it's up to you to make up your mind. You decide. So there is no social imposition on the individual. There is no ideological imposition on Arjuna. That look, no, you have to do this. So you are led there to make up your mind. So the knowledge is constituted in public view. In public view. You are present there as an audience. That's why they choose the form of this. We are the witnesses. I will not spend much time on the next point, that both in the Western tradition and Indian tradition, dialogues are at the foundation, at the root. I am a great student and admirer of Plato's dialogues, as also I am a great student and admirer of Aristotle. Two Western minds who look to me like Indian minds. You see, if you have parallel Indian thinkers, you see the way they reason, they talk, and Aristotle's Poetics, students of literature know, is the only Shastra in the Western tradition. It's composed like a Shastra. Now, Marcus Aurelius Augustus, the wise Roman emperor, it is not a contradiction in terms. Sometimes an emperor can be wise also. When he starts his meditations, he says, when I was young, I used to write dialogues like Plato. But then I gave up. I'm sure he gave up because to write like Plato, to compose dialogues, you have to have that comprehensive mind which can bring in everything, all points of view. And if you are like Kapil Kapoor, you better write an essay. Made up of your own sentences. Because you can't write a dialogue then. You can't compose a dialogue. So dialogue is at the root. And the structure of his dialogues is very interesting. You see, they move away from their city. You will be glad to know, in some of the dialogues it is mentioned, Plato and his friends go to Agra. Are you surprised? It is Agra. Agra is a Proto-Indo-European root. Agra. And they go there and they carry a little wine with them. And they just don't start, it's not like a formal inquiry. The dialogues are not like an inquiry in the Lok Sabha or in the assembly. It's not an inquiry, it's a conversation. It's a conversation. And therefore it is built up. So they have a little wine. And then he first starts by talking casually, Alcibiades, I understand yesterday you met and saw that man. And say yes, and like that, then. And our friend Dryden, in 1660s or so, our friend Dryden, poor thing, trying to reject the Greeks and the French, because the French had become more, powerful for the British. So they wanted to get rid of both of them. And I'm glad they took 300 years to free themselves of French. I hope in 300 years we will be free of English also. So Dryden, liberating, he writes an essay on dramatic poesy. He also composes a dialogue. He puts 4 persons in a boat, in a ship, and takes them away. So that is his analog of those Greek thinkers, going to Agra. So he puts in a boat and taking them away. And I think in India, you will put them in a bus and take them to a jail or some place. Or just as we used to pick up legislators because we don't want them to vote. So you take them away. So the first thing is, you see, it's important. Going away from the place. In the Buddhist theory of creation, the first step is go to a solitary place. For any idol maker, iconographer, any great artist who wants to compose something, design something, he withdraws himself to solitude. You can't stay in the house and your wife calls out कि घर में salt नहीं है, ले आओ. And you say, no, I am thinking. So you have to withdraw the solitude. You have to go away. It has both literal and a metaphorical meaning. You have to get away from the normal currents of thought. Your chitta has to be wiped clean. If you don't wipe it clean, you cannot focus and concretize. So this is one. And then 2 or 3 and more. I will not spend more time. Persuasion. Now in Indian tradition, the word samvad is a very recent word. In fact, samvad actually means conversation. And vad is our word, which is our the paribhashik shabd, a meta-linguistic word, which means disputation. And we have a long vad parampara. That is, we have a tradition of disputation with each